What is going on, y'all? Welcome back to 8 Cubes, the first 8 Cubes episode of the new year. Happy New Year to my co-host Lamby series. And of course, we're going to start with the season pass card that is coming out on Tuesday. That is Iron Patriot. We've talked about him a little bit. This is our chance to dive into the nitty-gritty of him. What I find unique about Iron Patriot, a 2-3 with an on-reveal ability that puts a 4, 5, or 6 cost card in your hand, and then if you are winning the lane that Iron Patriot is in the next turn, you get a 4 energy discount on that card, is that it is a card that explicitly goes in curve out mid-range decks and is explicitly good into decks that are turn 6 explosion decks. And what I mean by that is this is a card that helps even the playing field between a mid-range deck and something like Move Bounce, or in previous metas, something like Hela, decks that are not as good at early contesting. And so I think this is a card that is uniquely positioned to shake up a metagame that is currently in a rough equilibrium between a deck like Move Bounce and the various different mid-range piles that people can play.
Right, so firstly, Happy New Year to you, KM. Happy New Year to everyone that's watching as well. Welcome back to 8 Cubes. Yeah, so now jumping into Iron Patriot. So we talked about this card like on the previous episode as well, and I feel like this card, firstly, it cannot be bad, right? Like I mentioned this before, it's a 2-3 with a very obvious upside. Even if you don't get the upside, it's still a 2-3. And like you said, it closes the gap between what a mid-range stats deck is versus those Wombo combo decks. Because those Wombo combo decks, they don't really do much stuff in the early game, So like you likely will have more stats than them until the final turn. So that's where Iron Patriot comes in to give you a little bit more of a bit more free stuff, like in discounted like randomly generated cards. The problem with this card, I feel, is I guess because we've been talking about it being good for a while, but I also want to like just throw it out there a little bit. I think this card is one of those exponentially worse the later you draw it cards. Like if it's on turn 2, you draw this and you play the 1-drop, sure, you're in prime position. But I think drawing this on just turn 3 already makes it a bit, like not a bit, actually a lot worse, because drawing it on turn 3 means you need to play it on turn 3, then you need to win the location. It's like you need to win a location 1 turn later, and then that's something that's a bit more up in the air. It's a bit less consistent, I would say. So I would say this card is one of the best curve out 2-drops you could possibly play in your mid-range deck. But other than that, it's actually not fantastic. So definitely not one of the most crazy season pass cards they've done in a while, which I think is fine, Just a generic good card that could be not so good if you draw it late in the game. I don't know if this will see like mainstay power in mid-range decks or not, but it's something that's definitely worth a try.
I definitely like the shape of it. Like the kind of card that encourages you to just have a curve rather than. I think we all know on this channel, the kinds of decks I tend to find problematic are ones that are doing massive point explosions without priority on the final turn of the game. Hella, Move Bounce, like things that are really hitting massive levels of points that outdo what you can do in terms of curve and make it very hard to interact with them meaningfully as they do that. That's the kind of stuff that bothers me, and I like that this card sort of exists in a sort of explicit punish of that. There is not a lot that has existed to explicitly punish that before. And I think that this card will have a role in metagames that are about that kind of thing, dragging normal mid-range up to that level. What's interesting to me is, I guess, twofold. First, there is one major question hanging over my head. If you Red Guardian the Iron Patriot, do you still get the discount? Does that effect happen as part of the on reveal, or does that effect happen as part of Iron Patriot being on the board? And that's really interesting to me, because if you can Red Guardian the Iron Patriot, suddenly you're like, oh, okay, well, that's already like the best card in the game, and it blows out your Iron Patriot. That also adds some real interesting stuff to like Juggernaut in Iron Patriot decks, because one of the things that Juggernaut, I feel like, cries out for is basically a second use case. There are a bunch of decks that play Juggernaut and they only play him on turn 6, and now they can actually play him on turn 3 and it won't be like the worst thing you've ever done. And so I think Iron Patriot can bring that to the table as well. What I really want to know is, like, we've played a lot of Arshem, you and I. We know how bad a random 4, 5, and 6 can be. Like, they're good a lot of the time, but like, there's some really iffy ones. And so how many points is this adding for free on average is sort of what I want to know. And I feel like the number is like maybe you're getting like 7 free points. And that's really good. But it's also like, Proxima Midnight, Stature. Like that's what you're getting. That's the relative expected value of this card, which I think is very good. But it's like, it's not like, oh my god, here's my giant game winner. It's just good.
Yeah, so this is hilarious because that whole time you were making that like comment and that speech and points and stuff like that. My exact point that I was gonna follow up with was exactly the same thing, which is what is the amount of points we are
Yeah.
gonna be getting on average, which as I was thinking about it, I feel like it doesn't really matter. Like it doesn't really matter what amount of points we are really getting because it's nigh almost free. It's like
Yeah.
almost free, right? So like getting almost free extra stats like to like buff a mid-range dex bot to keep it like in line with trying to keep up with like wombo combo stuff. Any amount of stats will help, and I feel like the thing is playing like a free 4 cost is great. Playing a reduced cost 6 cost is also great, you know, that kind of thing. So I mean I'm mentioning this now really because later down in a few
Yeah.
like when we talk about the other topic, we will be talking a little bit more about like why free stuff is just good.
I mean, I think our audience can figure that one out.
Yeah.
Next up, Victoria Hand, a 2/3 with an ongoing ability that gives +2 power to every card you create in your hand. This card being ongoing is like super interesting because it means that it has additional synergy with a card that comes out later, Moonstone, which doubles the effects of cards that cost 1, 2, and 3 and have ongoing abilities. And it also means that, like, for the first time in a long time, they're pushing power into an ongoing space, which I think is very good because we have plenty of cards that are pushed power into other spaces, right? Anti-Venom pushed power into a space that Shadow King can regulate. Surtur pushed power into a space that Shang-Chi can regulate. Iron Patriot pushes power into a space that Mobius and maybe Red Guardian, we don't know, can regulate. What I find really interesting is that they haven't pushed power into ongoing cards that can be regulated by both Enchantress, Enchantress, Echo, and Rogue, right? Like there are more tech cards for ongoing cards than there are for plenty of stuff that they've pushed power into. So seeing this be an ongoing card makes me feel like I want them to do more of this. I want them to push more power into ongoing cards because there is more available counterplay to them. I think they can get wackier. This is a pretty wacky card. It's a 2/3 with real upside. It comes in a cache with Kate Bishop, who almost certainly goes with her. And so this is a really interesting card in a really interesting cache. What do you think we can do with her?
Well, so this card is like firstly what like you mentioned, right? Pushing more power into ongoing cards is actually a good thing because like they don't really have to worry about it going too out of control because there's many counters to ongoing cards, right? Like Enchantress and Rogue and Scroll, all that kind of thing. So that's a fine thing to do, which is this card. Okay, so this card I feel like might not be that easy to use,
Mm-hmm.
sadly, because I think the problem about all these setup based cards in Marvel Snap is that when it comes to setup cards, you really only have finite turns to set up, which is 6 turns, right? That's why I like to liken okay, because firstly, yes, this does work with Moon Girl, but I bring up Moon Girl not because I think it's gonna be great in Moon Girl. I bring up Moon Girl because the concept of Moon Girl is like you duplicate stuff in your hand, you get to play all these like multiples of good cards. But the thing is you only have 6 turns to set it up, and which means you only have turn 4 or 5 to play the Moon Girl, which is a bit like this card as well, right? You only have finite turns to create cards in your hand, and then you still need to play the cards that you create onto the board, you know. So I think this will be a good card if you are generating a lot of low cost cards, which means the hood comes to mind. So you like have time to play out the cards that you generate. Because can you imagine if you are generating like let's just say you play this and you play a Nick Fury, you're never getting all these Nick Fury cards out of your hand anyway. So I think this card will be great if you are generating low cost cards so that you can spam them on the board, which is what I would probably want to do with this. That's why I keep mentioning the hood, because I think the hood is like the strongest. Like, you know, you generate a 1/6, and then with this it's gonna be like a 1/8, you know, which is crazy. 1/8 is crazy. So I think generating low cost cards is the best way to benefit from playing this card.
See, I agree with you, but that's why I don't like the hood. And what I mean by that is, I think the hood's value proposition is already wrapped up in the demon being bigger, right?
So you're saying 1/6 is big enough?
One
Is that what
six
you're
is
trying to
big
say?
enough. I don't need to play this in addition to that. What I want
Fair.
this to be is with Kate Bishop, where I'm getting like multiple one costs out of the deal. I'm getting like, the Pim arrow is a
Mm.
one 1/6 now, you know? Like the arrows are just going to be way bigger and more impactful, and I think that's what I see her doing. Or maybe something like if you go fully into Quinjet stuff with Agent Coulson, where it's just like maybe you play this card in that kind of thing where you're just like doing that. Some sort of Devil Dinosaur Wiccan deck has been played recently. It's been kind of a thing. Something like that, where it's just like, this is a card that is pretty good, but in the worst case scenario, it's still a 2/3 and you're happy to play it. And you can use these generated cards for multiple different things. And then you have like, you brought up the Moon Girl thing and made a point that I think is really astute, which is you're only really playing Moon Girl in like 55% of the games you play that deck, because you are only going to have a 7 out of 12 chance to draw her by turn 4. And then by turn 5, let's say you really want to push it, let's say you play it her every single time you draw her on turn 4 and turn 5, well, then you're playing Moon Girl in 66% of your games, which means 33% of the time this card is going to do absolutely nothing, because the Moon Girl decks can't play cards that fill up their hand because of how hard it is for them to do the stuff that their hand needs to be done. Like, they need to actually manipulate their hand and get stuff on the board. It's actually one of the biggest problems they have. So they can't play these cards that go with Victoria Hand. And so there's a very odd thing going on here where it's like, I think she's strong, but I don't know if we're going to be able to figure out the correct shell for her. But I do think she's quite good.
And the funny thing is, I think when they were making this card, because now that you mentioned it, Victoria Hand, Moon Girl, they might have wanted this to work with Moon Girl, but like, in my opinion, I don't think it's gonna be that great. Yeah.
I think I have seen people propose that the reason she has her ability is because her name is Hand. I don't think they're doing that. I think the reason she has her ability is because she's a shield card. Victoria Hand in the comics is like Norman Osborn takes over Shield and also America and renames it Hammer, and she's like his she's
Right
his
hand.
Maria Hill, basically. Like where
okay, so she's like the
so like she's his Maria Hill, and so she's like an evil, or at least sort of flexibly moral shield agent. So she is like she's doing shield stuff here. I don't think it's because her name is Hand, but if it was, I mean, I'm not sure I'd be mad at it.
right.
Anti-Venom is, I think, the best of the build-around 4s in the game. And I think, you know, that's a pretty competitive category. When you think about what we're talking about here, we're talking about Anti-Venom, Doom 2099, Wiccan, arguably Galacta. Anti-Venom decks, for me, have been just so clearly the best performing decks that I've played in a very long time, due to the variety of interactive things they have. And I think that one of the things I want to drive home about this is it's not just the Ajax stuff. Anti-Venom, Malekith, Hydra Bob, Luke Cage, that's just good enough to make a lot of stuff good. We've seen it make Ronin good. I'm like 95% sure it can make Devil Dinosaur good. All of that stuff is just so powerful. And there's an underrated synergy that I want to talk about, which is Anti-Venom and Malekith. And what I mean by that is Malekith really pushes you to not play a lot of curve cards, because if you pull out like a 2/3 that's good on turn 2 out of your Malekith, you feel stupid, right? You pull your Kate Bishop. You have to run one Kate Bishop or V-Hand probably, but you not V-Hand. I did this exact thing in a recent video. The 2/3 that it's Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character. She puts a 6-drop in your hand. It costs.
Valentina.
Thank you, God. I did this exact thing like 3 videos ago. Anyway, Valentina or Kate Bishop tend to be the cards that you run in those decks as the one like actual curve 2-drop, and you are pretty sad when you see them. And Anti-Venom pushes you the same direction, because you want those things that you get to be high impact. You want to get, if you're going to get a 2-drop off of Anti-Venom or Malekith, US Agent, Hazmat, things like that, like big, beefy, impactful stuff. And the way that those two cards go together, I think, is really notable. And so when I'm talking about Anti-Venom here, I do want to put like a special note that I'm talking about Malekith as well, because they go together in a really powerful way. They tend to allow for a ton of really strong stuff to happen. And I just generally think that that package of build-arounds is just kind of the strongest mid-range shell you can possibly play right now.
Normally, I would have a lot of things to add right now, but like I just 100% agree with you, and I just want to say that Anti-Venom is good because zero cost card is great. Like honestly, for zero cost card on a 4-star, normally I really have a lot of things to add, but like zero a free card tagged to a 4/7 body. I don't really care what the free card is. It is free, and I'm playing a 4/7 to get a free card. Like it's just good. In mid range decks and in most decks that might not be mid range, it could still be good. But yeah, that's all I gotta add.
A 4/7, man. They're both that, right? Malekith is also a free card attached to. It's a 4/6, but like they're both just like here's a free guy. It's crazy.
Yeah, Malekith, I have more to add, but next topic will be perfect for that.
Sure. So in that context, it's probably worth talking about what I like to call the Ajax Trap. A lot of people see the Anti-Venom Malekith lists, and they all run Ajax, or they mostly do, but they look at that and they're like, that's an Ajax deck. And what I specifically want to talk about is I think people play the card Ajax too much. I don't mean putting it in your deck, I mean I think people put the card Ajax on the board in situations where they do not need him to be a thing and would instead be better off playing the second of their Malekith or Anti-Venom, right? For the record, that order is almost always Malekith into Anti-Venom.
Yeah.
I think that you are almost always going to be put out, not necessarily almost always by doing it the other way. It can be correct, but generally you want to do it in that order. But that can be a lot better than Ajax. And Ajax's main issue is A, weakness to Luke Cage, but B, it's like if you have your Luke Cage, he's not going to be that big, and he is going to be a 5-cost card. It's hard to make him work alongside other stuff later, and I think people over-index for him because they're like, oh, it's an Ajax deck, I'm supposed to be playing Ajax, when what the deck actually is just like, basically like 9 of the best cards in the game. Red Guardian, Luke Cage, Malekith, Anti-Venom, Hydra Bob, like they're all just beasts, right? And then you just sort of have the Ajax stuff along for the ride. But like you're playing Luke Cage because you're an Anti-Venom deck, not because you're an Ajax Afflict deck. That's just like some stuff you can put in there.
Yeah, so this is gonna, at least from my perspective, this is gonna be a bit more like technical, so just stay with me because I have a point that I really want to make, right? So this whole, okay, so when KM said people are physically playing Ajax on the board too much, I 100% agree. So playing Ajax as a 5-cost is what's the point of it? The point is to go tall, right, with your hazmat. Like after you play the hazmat, you go really tall. But that's also subject to the problem of if they have Luke Cage, which a lot of people have Luke Cage as well. So here's the thing that I want to throw out, which is Ajax is good to play in this deck for sure because it synergizes, but you want to play it like it's one of the things that if you hit off of Anti-Venom, it is the nuts.
Yes.
Like you don't really need to play Ajax as a 5-cost in this deck to win with this deck because like you said, right, playing the Malekith and then playing the Anti-Venom is also a lot of stats. And the thing about the Malekith is it pulls your low-cost cards. In this deck, what is the low-cost cards? You pull the Hazmat, you pull the Luke Cage, and Hazmat hits everything on the board, right? Hits white and multiple things. Like once you do that, then maybe consider playing the Ajax onto the board. Like you don't strictly have to play Ajax on 5 if you don't have access to the Hazmat, you know, right? Like you don't really need to just strictly play a 5 because you have 5 mana. You can always do something else, you know. So I think based on your evaluation of what happens with your Malekith or whatever, then maybe consider playing the Ajax. That's what I'm trying to say. And at the end of the day, going 4/6, get a free card into 4/7, get a free card is a lot of stats anyway. And obviously, if you hit the Ajax off of that, sure. If not, then just do other stuff, right? Because like the whole deck is just a bunch of counters and raw stats that hit everything on the board. Ajax is just one card that goes tall if it can happen, not
Yes.
mandatorily.
Yes, like it's a role player in the deck. If you need something to go tall, he's the only guy that can do that. That's what he does. He's important in the deck. He plays his role. You need him to do that. You need something that can do stuff like that, unless you're packing way more answers than the deck is typically packing. But you don't need that every game. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, my dream curve involve Ajax all the time. And I'm not really sure that's true. I think Ajax is really good. He's a very important part of the deck, but it's not like you're like, well, when I envision my 6-turn curve, this is like, we're getting onto like a bit of a tangent here, but like, this is something that bothers me is when people like put in YouTube videos like, here's turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, turn 6, like context.
Yeah, I rarely do that. I try to rarely do that.
It's one of those things where it's like, I understand how it can be useful as a theoretical learning device, but I do not think it is a reasonable way to expect people to actually like get it. I don't think that like that explaining stuff outside of the context of what your opponent is doing is a viable way to get good at card games. I think it's like a let's just like, get to infinite kind of thing. But
Yeah.
it does strike me as like a lot of people envision Ajax as part of that when they talk about this kind of stuff. And I don't
Yeah.
think he necessarily is.
Yeah. I think the closest thing we can you ever do right now to like a step by step, turn by turn, this will win you the game thing is like Doom 2099
Yeah.
related decks, because
Yeah.
that one's a bit more like spoken for. But
Yes.
anyway, regarding the whole Ajax thing, I just thought of this again. We mentioned this a few months ago on our video, but and which will turn this into your favorite TFT podcast again, which is basically you don't force the comms, right? You don't force
Yes.
Ajax just cause he costs 5. It's if you have the setup, the Ajax wins. But if you don't have the setup, just roll it away. Okay, you can't roll it away, but play something else.
Yeah. Havok is finally having a moment in the sun. He is part of a deck that is actually kind of real. And by kind of real, I mean actually good. It's sort of supplanted the role that normal bounce had in the metagame. I think normal bounce was sort of on the downswing generally, just by being outcompeted by move bounce a lot of the time.
Mhm.
But I think Rocket and Groot really sped up that downswing because it's like very uniquely good against the deck that is playing cards a bunch of times, and very uniquely not good against move bounce, whose scalers just go so tall as to not really care. And so they end up being a decks that are getting farther and farther apart, which means that the bounce archetype, I think a lot of the players are looking for something similar, but maybe not move bounce. They ended up gravitating towards this Havok Thena deck that is a lot like the old Agent Venom decks. It is, of course, also an Agent Venom deck, but without the Iron Man type stuff that it had at the very top end. And instead of using Iron Man, we're using cards like Havok that are going to get very big. It's a Thena scalar deck. There's sages in there, stuff like that. And that is what a lot of people who were typically playing bounce are playing now. And I think the main competitive advantage it has, other than being a better deck in a Rocket and Groot, is that it is a deck that is very able to go extremely tall on 2 locations, which is good into Doom 2099, and that it is a deck that plays Cosmo and Red Guardian, which is as good as you can get as a deck like this into something like Move Bounce. You can actually steal games from them on that, where like normal bounce is just like, damn, I hope they don't do their thing because it goes bigger than me.
Yeah, so just try to picture this deck. Like this deck is basically just the Agent Venom deck. That instead of running the Iron Man, you go a bit like less expensive. You play the Havok, right? Because you can't really exactly play Havok and Iron Man in the same deck. It's a bit
Definitely
difficult. If I had
cannot.
my way, I want to play both, but I can't. So, but yeah, what this deck can do is what Agent Venom midrange was doing previously. Which was it was running Cosmo as well. And I think Cosmo's still the only 3 mana 3/3 that I would willingly play in decks and still win games because the effect's just so game
Whoa.
breaking, right? Oh,
Whoa.
Red
Okay.
Guardian's
Okay.
another 3 mana 3/3
I mean,
that also
arguably
can win.
Rocket and Groot, but like, yeah, Red Guardian is like, you cannot say that. Come on now. Don't
Yeah,
talk that way about
Ray
my
Guardian
boy.
is easier to use as well. Okay, and this deck runs both.
It
Actually, all 3
does.
of them.
Yes.
Rocket and Groot as well.
It
Rocket and
does
Groot is
run
more
all
like
through.
stats, but
Yes.
I actually really like Rocket and Groot more than speed. I guess that's the closest thing I compare it to
Mm.
because of the stats, right? Because Rocket and Groot has flexibility, albeit sometimes being a bit smaller. But the flexibility of being mini vision kind of like is quite super important for me. But yeah, so basically this is just it's like a small ball deck. Like you really play all the small cards, then you buff them with Agent Venom, and then they get compounded in terms of stats, and then you have like a floodgate, which is Cosmo, and then you have like a small counter, which is the best tech card in the game, which is Red Guardian. So this deck has a bit of everything. And before we actually had this conversation right now, I was telling KM that when I saw this deck, like this was totally something that I would play, and he was right. Yeah, this is totally something that you play because I've been a very big fan of Agent Venom decks. I've been playing them for like way past their due date, and then now there's another one that's viable
Yeah.
again. So like if you guys like Anti-Venom decks, Agent Venom decks, then this could be something for you as well.
The section's called the 2099 pile, and it's me doing my due deference to Doom 2099, who, like, I know I said I thought Anti-Venom was better. I do think Anti-Venom is better. But Doom 2099 right now is supporting a bunch of different archetypes. And maybe the reason I think Anti-Venom is better is because people only play him in good decks, right? Like nobody's playing bad Anti-Venom. But there's a lot of people playing some pretty medium Doom 2099 decks that he is basically single-handedly dragging to relevance because when you play him on turn 4, it's super busted. Doom 2099 is a fantastically strong card. I think of all the cards that released in December, it is the one I would be the least surprised to see get nerfed, but it's also the one that I would be like, all right, I'm not really sure this is that far off. I think what's interesting to me is over the course of December, I went from thinking, okay, Galacta, yeah, that's pretty strong. I could see that getting a nerf to 4-5, to thinking, no, Galacta's totally fine. And now we're looking at Doom 2099, and I look at Doom 2099, and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty strong. I could see that getting a nerf to 4-1. And I kind of wonder if Iron Patriot comes out, and it definitely doesn't go in Doom 2099 decks, am I just going to look back at this conversation and be like, you know what? Actually, he's totally fine. Leave him where he is. And I kind of think that's possible. Like, this is definitely not a card that can go with Iron Patriot. It's definitely not a card that can go with Victoria Hand. It's a card that does explicitly, in my opinion, go in RSM decks. I think it's quite good in the Scream deck. I think there are a couple of Turbo Doom 2099 decks that are at least viable and playable. And I think that even the Lockdown Doom 2099 deck isn't all that bad. But like it's doing a lot right now to just give people, if you're already a deck that would play like that, you just throw Doom 2099 in and your floor gets massively higher, basically.
Yeah, just want to throw one thing out there first about Galacta is that I also had this same thought like when we saw Galacta for the first time. I was like, okay, she's underwhelming. Then when I played her, then I was like, whoa, she's amazing. And I was like, okay, could this get enough? But then now that I think about it again, I was like, nah, this card cannot get enough,
Yeah,
because I feel like
she's fine.
she's just good stats, you know.
Yeah.
So like, unless they print something that specifically makes Galacta way too busted, I don't think this card ever gets hit by enough. And anyway, back to Doom 2099. Yeah, so this card is just, so my opinion on this card is very interesting, because Doom 2099 is very obvious in what it does, right? The deck building is also simplified because you are playing a Doom 2099 deck, because there's also only finite things you can do and like styles you can play when you play this style of like one card a turn decks. But this card, in my opinion, is in general stronger than most of the fours in the game right now. But it doesn't get the cubes, is my issue, because it's so obvious when you gotta go, right? Because you gotta play it on the board. You know that the whole deck is just gonna play one card on turn 5, one card on turn 6. Then you count the Doom boards. You know the exact power output every single time. So that's why a card like Anti-Venom, even though it's probably less easy to like make your opponent retreat, but Anti-Venom is the card that gets the 8 cubes. You know, Doom 2099 doesn't get you 8 cubes. I feel like Doom 2099 getting you 8 cubes is just your opponent not understanding what's going on. But like Doom 2099 doesn't get 8 cubes as long as they count. They do a bit of math, it doesn't really get you 8 cubes. Anti-Venom gets you 8 cubes. So in the grand scheme of things, which is the better card? I guess Doom 2099 in a nutshell is like just easier to play, more overall points consistently. But if you're talking about getting 8 cubes, Anti-Venom is probably the one that gets you more 8 cubes for sure, right?
Yeah, I think the weird thing is that despite my opinion that Anti-Venom is a better card, I think
we keep
Doom
saying
2099. I know. I knew it would happen. I knew it would happen in my preview video for that season. I was like, I'm gonna mix these cards up.
I already did it 3 times. Yeah. All right, carry on.
But I think that Doom 2099 is like a little more obviously powerful and nerfable.
Yeah.
Where it's like Anti-Venom can be a little more subtle. I think it's a little better, but it's also like it's not very obvious when you lost to the Anti-Venom. It's extremely obvious when you lost to the Doom 2099. Yeah. And with as much respect as I can muster for the Marvel Snap community, they tend to get way more mad at the obviously strong thing than at the subtly strong thing for a variety of reasons.
Really?
This kind of brings me to my theory, though, and it's something that's been percolating for a while that I wanted to really put into words, and it's what I like to call Mr. Negative theory. Lamby's never heard this before, so you're going to get his immediate reaction to Mr. Negative theory. Here's my theory, and what I mean, I'll lay it out for you, and then I'll do some definitions. Okay. My theory. Marvel Snap should be and has been printing more Mr. Negatives. And what I mean by that are Mr. Negatives defined as the card by which this specific archetype scales. The card that you need to see for this archetype to make sense. So here are a couple of examples of cards that I would describe as archetype Mr. Negatives. Scream, Doom 2099, Surtur, Anti-Venom, Agent Venom. These are Mr. Negatives. These are cards that are like explicitly, you do them in this one specific way, but they are the reason you do this specific thing. Anti-Venom is the reason these decks are Luke Cage decks. You have all of these Scream decks that only exist because of her. Doom 2099 decks only exist because of him. And these cards, to me, have the most similar dynamic to like a sort of evened out Mr. Negative. Where Mr. Negative is only about doing Mr. Negative and you basically never win any other time. This deck is these decks are mostly about them, but you can win some of the rest of the time. And I think that like when I say Mr. Negative theory, that's just because I think they're close to Mr. Negative, but all of them are like versions of what I would describe as fixed or less polarized Mr. Negative, where they're still very polarized, but you can still play games where you don't draw them. And I think that's a really good spot for the game to be in.
So essentially, you're saying that they're printing more cards that define a deck, right? Like if you look at this card, like this card is the build around for so and so deck. And if you don't draw so and so card, your deck sometimes falls apart. But I mean, not as hard as Mr. Negative, right? That's why the floor is lower, the ceiling is floor is higher, ceiling is lower. Is that
correct?
The right way of putting
it? Floor is higher, ceiling is lower. But they're all like that.
Correct. They're all build arounds and they're all like you kind of want to draw this card to do the deck's thing, right? And so based on what you've just said, I think most decks have one of that in there, right? And this brings us back to the point of Anti-Venom Malekith, because Anti-Venom Malekith decks have two.
Yes.
Of these.
It has two.
That's why the deck's the best deck.
It has more than two, honestly.
Now it all links because like the Scream deck needs to draw the Scream, Doom 2099 needs to draw the Doom 2099, but the Anti-Venom Malekith deck can draw either and do broken things, and there's a chance you get to play two in one game and you do very, very broken things. So yeah, I get it. Like I mean, I'm not purposefully trying to link it back to the first topic, but it kind of helps. But I do think that most of the cards that are printed right now, they have an intended purpose to scale a certain archetype, and I like it because I guess it gives direction to deck building. I feel a lot of trading card games, they also do this as well, whereby they print cards that are intended to be used in specific ways. Just that I like the fact that, like, at least for now, none of them are as swingy as Mr. Negative. Like, if you don't draw so and so card, you don't straight up die, which is a Mr. Negative deck essentially. But if you do draw them, you are in a winning position, but not maximum winning like Mr. Negative as well. There's flexibility there.
And the interesting thing about this to me is, like, you know, that you could use this terminology to describe Victoria Hand, right? Like, that's what she's doing, right? Like, you could use this terminology to describe Iron Patriot. Like, Iron Patriot on 2 is going to be crazy, right? Like, that kind of stuff seems to be the way you can make good cards in Marvel Snap without breaking the game in half. But there's this other bit, right? Which is the archetypes that don't get cards are not going to be able to stand up to the ones that do. Like, these cards, destroy. Like, these cards are...
Where my destroy bros
Yes, like, where's the Scream for destroy? Right? Like, where's destroy Scream? Where's it at? Like, where is... Because, like, I don't really know exactly what the solve is, but they're clearly good enough at doing... Like, they gave the move your opponent's stuff deck... It's an actual deck now, basically entirely on the back of Scream, right? People in my comments think I'm way too high on Scream. I think they're way too low because I don't think people understand how much that deck sucks ass if it doesn't have that card. That deck is so insanely unplayable without Scream. And for the record, the reason I'm high on Scream 2099 is actually the exact same thing. It gets to play two of them. It's just got two Mr. Negatives. Like, it's doing the thing. And so you have this just weird set of, like, specific... I don't know the term for it, like a type of design where it's like, this is built to go with other stuff, but like decks like Destroy just haven't gotten one. Give me the Destroy Scream, dude.
All right, so for the final topic, we are calling it Uno Reverse, simply because we've been in this mid-range play good cards on curve meta for a while. So I just wanted to throw a curveball out there. Don't get me wrong, I love the current meta. I kind of wanted to stay this way for a bit, but like, what would it take for us to go back to a bit more of a less mid-rangey, more wombo combo meta? And I think KM has some very interesting insights to share about that.
The answer is purely point ceiling. Like, when we're in combo metas, there are two things that define what the combo meta is about. One, how big does it get? Two, can you profitably interact with it? And so the decks that I hate tend to be the decks where the answer is really big and not at all, right? Hella is a great example. Move Bounce is a great example. Like, these are decks that explicitly are dodging tech cards by not having priority, and in so doing, also vomiting a billion points on the final turn of the game. Move Bounce even dodges tech cards by, like, moving stuff around. Like, let alone the priority stuff, you still have to guess if they got an active Madam Web, even if they didn't bounce it back to hand, right? Like, so what it takes to go back to a combo meta is a deck with a very high point ceiling. That's what it takes that you can't interact with. Otherwise, Living Tribunal would still be good. Living Tribunal
Yes.
is the exact opposite of that. Like, this is a deck that everyone can interact with in a billion different ways, and it falls apart because of that. But you want to be a combo deck that has unaccountable levels of points that'll beat most normal decks without them having the ability to interact with you. And that is overwhelmingly just throw prio final turn crap.
Yes.
Overwhelmingly, that's what it looks like.
Yeah, so as you were talking about it, I realized something which there is a very good chance, never is a very strong word, but I think with the way the game is right now and with how they're like printing cards, there's a very easy way for them to just never steer us back to a full combo uninteractable meta. Because firstly, there's so many cards that counter stuff in the game already, right? There's like Cosmos, and then that's if your opponent throws Prio, there is Cosmo, and if your opponent's on Prio, it's even easier, right? There's Enchantresses, there's Red Guardians, there's so many tech cards in the game. So for a combo deck to be able to survive, it kind of has to beat all of those, because the moment the combo deck comes up, people will just play the tech card in the deck and then you just die. So I think a combo deck, I don't really know how a combo deck can beat all of those things. I don't even know how they can print cards to
I mean,
let a
look at
combo
Move
deck beat all of
Bounce.
this.
It's doing it right
Yeah,
now.
it's just throwing Prio, right? So
Yeah.
throwing Prio is not unbeatable because Cosmo exists. So this is the caveat here. The way that they can make combo decks viable again is they delete Cosmo. But
Well,
obviously, they are not deleting Cosmo. They're
it's like
never going to delete
super
Cosmo.
viable. Like, I don't want to overstate my case here. Move Bounce is really good. It's like single-handedly the combo sector of the meta right now. Like,
Yeah.
and that is
That's why
because
Cosmo is relevant, right? That's why
yes,
Cosmo is relevant.
yes, and so, but it's like, yeah, we have Cosmo and Eliath, but that's not guaranteed necessarily to work. And the fact
Yeah.
that, like, you could just like put that in the wrong lane is one of the big strengths of decks like that, right? Like, that is, I think it's entirely possible we go back to a combo meta, because all it would take is them printing like Madam Web 2. They could do that very easily. They could just do like any card like Madam Web, who, by the way, I absolutely should have mentioned in my discussion of Mr. Negatives. It just prints another one of those. It's very easy. They're probably going to do it at some point. They just do it for an archetype that isn't a mid-range archetype and is a combo archetype like Move, right? Like, just print another card that goes in that like is Mr. Negative. Print Mr. Negative 2. That deck gets 50 times better and it does all of this stuff, right? Like, that's the issue, is the lack of interaction. That is the thing that
Mm.
makes these decks as good as they are. And right now, the best we can do to interact with that stuff is like Red Guardian and Cosmo, which is not perfect, but it's like close enough. With every other combo deck, there's better tech for it. There's Fenris Wolf for Hela. There's a bunch of stuff that is possible. But that also means that it does become harder for a combo deck to exist unless it gets a Mr. Negative type card.
Yeah. I mean, I actually want to add one thing as well, which is when we say combo deck or like a combo meta, the thing is, yes, I agree that move bounce exists right now, but outside of like the top percentage of players, it doesn't really exist still. Whereas for Hela back then, it existed everywhere, right? So at the end of the day, I think why move bounce, and I think you guys already know what I'm gonna say. You guys already know this, but like why move bounce is relevant now in this meta where there is still so much counterplay to combos, because move bounce it's a combo deck that scales with player agency. That's why you don't really see it everywhere, because combo decks that exist everywhere cannot exist right now because of the amount of counters. But move bounce can exist because if you are good with like at this game, essentially, you can work around all these like tech cards and stuff like that. Whereas in the past, Hela didn't really need you to work around that hard. Everyone can just do the thing. Whereas for move bounce, you really need to do the thing very well. Then that's why I think it can potentially still exist right now.
And with that, I think it's time to bring this episode to an end. Thank you so much to everyone for sticking through all of what we just talked about. Thank you so much. I have been KM Best. He has been Lamby Series. He's about to take us out.
Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Happy 2025, and we'll see you guys real soon.